Hello, hello. I'm Aaron Aid. You're watching Boom Bust live from New York City, and these are some of the global financial stories impacting your world today. Now it's the first Friday of the month, which means it's BLS numbers time. A surge in U.S. jobs sent the dollar soaring, and I'll break down the numbers for you coming right up. Then David Beckworth is on the show. The Cato Institute scholar is sharing with us his insight on jobs in the U.S. economy. And Boom Bust producer Bianca Pacini is telling us how major cities throughout the United States are addressing ever-increasing rental costs. Time now to get to it. U.S. jobs numbers came out Friday. Employers added 295,000 jobs in February, and the unemployment rate dropped to 5.5%. Now, the declining unemployment rate from 5.7% in January to 5.5% in February took unemployment to its lowest level since May 2008. This significantly beat Wall Street's expectations. Economists were anticipating the payrolls to rise by only 240,000 jobs. Now, February marked the 12th straight month that employment gains have been above 200,000, which is the longest run since 1994. In fact, employment numbers are now in territory that some Fed officials consider consistent with full employment. And finally, we saw an inkling of wage growth. Average hourly earnings rose by 3 cents last month, leaving the year-on-year gains at 2%. Hiring was led by restaurants, bars, professional business services, buildings, and healthcare. However, falling oil prices took their toll on the drilling sector as mining jobs dropped by 9,000. Now, over the past year, the number of unemployed people is down 1.7 million, while the number of long-term unemployed has fallen to 1.1 million. And with 12 million jobs added over 60 straight months, the U.S. has seen the longest streak of private sector job gains on record. Last year was the best year for job growth since 1999. The dollar rallied to a fresh 11.5-year high against a basket of currencies as traders brought forward bets on when the Fed would raise interest rates. U.S. stocks and government bond prices, however, fell. Now, while economists acknowledge the sluggish wage growth, they say tightening conditions in the labor market could force the Fed to raise rates as soon as June. To get his insight on jobs in the U.S. economy, I was joined earlier by David Beckworth. David is a professor of economics at Western Kentucky University and adjunct scholar at the Cato Institute. He also worked as an economist for the U.S. Department of the Treasury. I first asked David why a one-size-fits-all interest rate policy, like in the U.S., doesn't work in Europe. Here's what he had to say.
In the U.S., if you lose your job in North Dakota, it's fairly easy to move down to Texas. Same language, fairly similar cultures. It's easy to move into to find a new job in the U.S. In Europe, it's challenging. Even though they're legally allowed to do that, it's difficult to move to a different country, a different language, different culture. So one thing when we talk about economists is labor mobility. Labor mobility in the Eurozone is far less than is in the U.S. So in theory, people from Spain and Greece should pack up and move to Germany. But that's not happening at a rate that would solve the problems of the Eurozone. So if the Eurozone could get greater labor mobility, then the Eurozone project might have more hope. Another factor that contributes to this and what makes the countries different is that the U.S. has a common treasury or a federal treasury. And so in Texas is doing great. It's thriving. People are paying higher income tax. That income tax is sent to Treasury, then sends it up to, say, Michigan, where Michigan's having a high unemployment rate. And so it makes it more palatable to be in this currency union. People in Michigan don't feel the effects as much as they would because funds are being transferred from a prosperous part of the currency union, Texas, to the one that's struggling. And in Europe, they just don't have that. And there, again, there's history that goes against this. It's tough to make the argument to the Germans, hey, your tax dollars need to go help those Greeks even more. It's just a tough sell. In the U.S., it's, I'm giving money, I'm an American, I'm giving money to another American. It's much easier to sell to do. So you need labor mobility, you need fiscal transfers among the regions of the currency union. Those things just are lacking in the Eurozone. A final way to solve this is you could hope that all the countries have the same business cycle. The booms and busts will occur at the same time. That simply isn't happening. It doesn't happen in the U.S. What we have are these buffers that they don't have.
Right now, the U.S. would seem to be doing pretty well if one only looked at how many jobs we're adding to the economy each and every month. So do you think the path of job creation will get the Fed to raise rates this year? What do you think?
I think they're on track. I mean, every indication they've given says that they're going to start raising rates later this year. And if you look at employment, it does seem to suggest that the economy is reached escape velocity. And if it continues at this pace, it will get closer and closer to full employment. GDP is giving a slightly different picture. I'm with those who are becoming more and more suspicious of what GDP actually tells us. This economy is becoming increasingly digitized, and what GDP actually captures is less and less, I think, precise. So I do think that the Fed's looking at the employment numbers. It also probably feels some political pressure to do something soon. But I think it's basing a lot of its analysis on the labor market and what it sees there as a motivation for raising rates later this year.
Now, if you use the same kind of Taylor rule style analysis on the U.S. that you recently used on Europe, how would the Fed's policy rates look compared to what the Taylor rule says?
Well, the Taylor rule, if you use the 1999 version, and that I think is the more appropriate version, that would show that the ideal interest rate is now getting close to zero, maybe just crossing over zero. So if you look at it, it shows a negative value from about 2008 up to about the present. So, the Fed has had rates, close to 0%. The Taylor rule says they should have been -4, -3, -2. As the economy recovers, the Taylor rule is slowly showing an increase in that rate. So I think right about now the Fed is close to where it should be, but as the economy continues to improve, and assuming that it does, that Taylor rule will begin to indicate it's time to raise interest rates. Whether it can continue to do that, if the rest of the world slows down, is a different story. But if the rest of the world slows down, then maybe the Taylor rule will say something different.
David, why has the Fed kept rates at 0% for so long after the U.S. economy supposedly recovered?
Well, I would argue it hasn't fully recovered. We're not at full employment. There's still excess capacity. Again, we're getting close to full capacity, but we're still not there. And interest rates naturally tend to follow where the economy goes. So when the economy gets really weak, interest rates tend to go down. When the economy grows robustly, rates tend to go up. And interest rates can be viewed simply as a price that clears a market, in this case, the entire economy here. And on some occasions, when the economy has a really sharp recession, the Great Depression, the Great Recession, interest rates have to go so low that they actually have to go negative to clear the market, so to speak. And my sense is they did go negative, as the Taylor rule indicates they should have gone negative. But the Fed simply couldn't do that. So instead of saying the Fed has kept rates low, the Fed has simply tried to adjust its target interest rate to where the market clearing rate would be anyways. And now, as it continues to go up, as the economy improves, the Fed's beginning to respond. So maybe another way of saying this is the Fed is more of a follower to the market clearing interest rate. And I think the Fed had the Fed tightened sooner, we would have been in a far different situation in 2015. May not have had all this job creation.
Now, if you had to choose, David, you had to choose a central bank that helped the economy more, would you choose the ECB or the Fed, and why?
Oh, certainly the Fed. As you know, I've been a critic of the Fed over the past 6 years, but it's definitely done a better job. If you compare the performance of total spending in current terms, the U.S. has been relatively stable since about 2009, late 2009, where the European Union, the Eurozone, has been, it started to grow, then it's begun to flatten. And in the case of the periphery, it's actually fallen. So the Fed has taken a much more aggressive stance relative to the ECB. Are there ways it could have done it better? Absolutely. It could have been more systematic, predictable, could have had its programs, its QE programs tied to some kind of target. So there's room for improvement in both central banks, but the Fed has definitely done a better job. And I think we're seeing the fruits of that, and that is the better job creation.
That was David Beckworth, assistant professor of economics at Western Kentucky University and adjunct scholar at the Cato Institute. Time now for a very quick break, but stick around because when we return, Boom Bust producer Bianca Fascini will be on the show telling us all about the petite way that cities around the U.S. are handling rising rental costs. You'll see what I'm talking about after the break. Then Bianca, Edward, and myself are breaking down your questions, comments, and concerns live on the show in our weekly accrued interest segment. And remember, you can see all segments featured in today's show on YouTube at youtube.com/boombustrt and also on Hulu at hulu.com/boom-bust. Now, as we head to break, here are a look at your closing numbers of the bell. Don't go anywhere.
I think the shutdown's pathetic, Larry. We shouldn't have to pay taxes then, should we?
Good idea, Jesse.
But have no fear, because the billionaire oligarchs are here.
What if there were a country in which the government operated outside of constitutional rule?
40% of the food that we produce in the country never makes it into our mouths.
How much fallout do you think this is going to create for the CIA?
Do you think this is what's triggering the crisis?
America's the largest economy in the world. It's also the largest debtor nation in the history of the world.
I need to know what to be terrified of. There is nothing scarier than not knowing what to freak out about.
One minute they were working toward the American dream, the next they were just trying to survive the night. It's time for Americans and lawmakers in Washington to wake up and start talking about the real causes of poverty in America.
That's going to change your mind. Because in a mad world, only the bold make a difference.
Actions speak louder than words. And in a world where words mean nothing, I'm watching.
Welcome back to the show. Now, as rental costs in the U.S. continue to rise, Americans are searching for a way to live more affordably and sustainably. Boom Bust producer Bianca Fascini took a look at the trend of micro-housing and how it could change the real estate market. Take a look.
Rent in places like New York and San Francisco are known for being expensive, but a new study shows rent in typically cheaper cities is also increasing. At the same time, the demand for urban rentals is outpacing the supply. And according to Zillow, 15 of the largest 50 metro areas experienced annual growth in rents of 5% or higher. Coupled with stagnant wages alone, pricey rent is making it harder for people everywhere to find affordable housing. So, as people continue to flock to urban areas with somewhat of a budget in mind, city planners are trying to pack people into space that's already developed. As a result, a new alternative called micro-housing was created, and it's exactly what it sounds like. Houses and apartments that are much smaller than the average, and these homes don't come cheap. The first micro-apartment complex in Manhattan, called My Micro NY, offers apartments sized between 260 and 360 square feet for $2,000 to $3,000 a month. In Washington, it's not much different. At the Harper, located in the U Street corridor, 350 square feet apartments cost almost $1,800 a month. Proponents of micro-housing tout the small living space as relatively cheaper and more environmentally friendly. They also claim it's more communal by encouraging you to spend less time in your apartment, but it's also a result of the sharing economy. Collaborative consumption has already changed the way we travel with apps like Uber and Airbnb, both of which capitalized on the decline of car ownership in a saturated hotel market. Considering rent remains on a steady incline, it seems like micro-apartments might actually make a dent in the real estate market. In Washington, Bianca Fascini, RT.
Up now is our Defining Moments segment, showcasing the best insight and comments from our guests over the past week. Take a look at what they had to say on Venezuela, eminent domain, Apple Pay, Ukraine, and the Federal Reserve. Enjoy.
When you look at Brazil, the very strong country overall. Their major oil company is embroiled in, I suppose, a scandal of sorts that it's more political. They have a new CEO. Overall, it's an interesting place to think about from an energy perspective. A big biofuel industry there. They have a lot of potential deep water oil, and in the current price environment for oil, I mean, we've really seen a big decline over the last 12 months. I said some of those projects probably don't look as favorable as they did 1, 2, 3 years ago.
Yeah.
So. It's all, when you think about Petrobras, if you think about a higher oil price in the future, maybe it's something to look at, or look at Brazil in general. But if we're kind of in a lower price environment, some of their oil might not be as accessible.
The basic idea of eminent domain is that if a city needs to build a road, and there's one person with their old house right in the middle of where you build that road, well, you can't let that one house dominate the needs of a city of 1 million people to build a road. So that's the idea of eminent domain. And again, this doesn't take property away. It does take property away while compensating those individuals at some sort of market value for the property. So you are compensated, but you are forced to sell. So governments have always been allowed to do this. The question is whether governments can do this on behalf of private entities for some sort of public benefit. So what happened in the Connecticut case in New London is a private developer came in and wanted to remove what was called blighted housing, basically have slum removal and replace that with fancy new condominiums. And they did that using eminent domain. This is something in general that a government can do, but extending this right to private individuals is a much different thing. We have the same sort of deal going on here then with the stadium issue with Barclays. You have existing buildings being cleared out of the way in order to build an arena. In general, that's not a problem if that arena is being built by the government. But when that building is being built primarily for a private interest, you have some question about whether that is something that's, first of all, in the best public interest, also whether that's actually legal, and whether we'll see this going through in the future.
What happened here is really the fundamental problem of proof of identity. While the Apple Pay system and other electronic token-based systems eliminate what they call man-in-the-middle attacks, where someone's able to read your credit card as it passes over the internet or a phone line or can hack a payment terminal, they get rid of that problem with man-in-the-middle attacks by making a credit card take a one-time use token. So even if they can spy on your transaction, the information that they get is useless to use a second time. However, if you have enough personal information on someone, you can create a credit account in their name and use those same systems in order to create illegal transactions. So this problem is really an origination issue. It's really a question of how do you prove that you are who you say you are when you're remotely signing up for a service, when you're remotely doing a transaction. It's really about identity issues and identity theft so much as the payment card system itself. So Apple Pay, Google Pay, these things are far more secure with tokenization when it comes to that really common man-in-the-middle attack. But at the other end here, you still have the problem of if someone knows enough about you, if they know your social security number, your street address, your name, they're going to be able to open credit accounts in your name.
Why would Norway, if the Ukrainians won't pay the Russians, why should Norway expect that the Ukrainians will pay them? So, you know, the trouble with the Ukraine is that it's been taken over by Washington. The government is Washington. They don't have an independent government. They're a vassal state, and Washington is using the Ukrainians in efforts to embarrass Russia. It causes Russia problems as excuse for sanctions against Russia. And the main purpose of the sanctions, Aaron, is not to hurt Russia. It's to break off the European economic and political relationships with Russia. Because Washington was afraid that the growing commerce between Europe and Russia, the growing good political relations, was pulling Western and Eastern Europe out of Washington's orbit. And so they said, okay, we're going to put a halt to that. And that's what the Ukraine is. That's what it's about. It's entirely to embarrass Russia, to use it for demonization, and to break up the relationships between Russia and Europe.
If we were to step back from any particular number about the economy right now in terms of GDP, or I think the consumer sentiment number just came in for February, and it's at a it's at a low. Ignore it for a second. Let's just talk about economic growth in general. If one reads Ed Phelps correctly, mass flourishing comes from increasing in innovation. We want to focus on innovation. Now, it may be, as Tyler Cowen argues, that big innovation is over. We're still going to have minor innovations like smartphones, and they're going to influence the economy. The idea that minor innovations can't move us forward is definitely silly. So there's still going to be some kind of innovation. How do we get more innovation in our economy? It's allowing entrepreneurs, who are at the heartbeat of any sort of expansion of innovation, to use capital in ways that haven't been used before, to have good perception of profitable opportunities in the future. And you can't do that if capital is being manipulated. You can't do that if there is a misalignment of capital in general and you don't have good expectations. And what causes that? The Fed's artificially low interest rates are one of them. Dodd-Frank's particular regulatory regimes being implemented is part of that. The Recovery Act was part of that. There are these huge things that have, from my perspective, created a misalignment of capital, have not allowed for capital to be properly aligned after a recession, and distort signals for the future that make it difficult for entrepreneurs to do big things that can create big kinds of steps towards any substantive innovation to drive our economy forward. So I think it's right to say, let's talk about the economy, let's talk about the Fed and how they're influencing that process.
It is weekly accrued interest time, one of my favorite parts of the week. And this is the time of the week and the show where we put you, the viewer, into the driver's seat, letting you steer the show with your questions, comments, and concerns. Fielded by myself, Bianca, and Edward. You sent them in throughout the week, and we are addressing them. So, Bianca, what are people saying this week? What's up first?
Yeah, all right. First comments from YouTube. Looks like the Fed has two options here. Continue on the bubble-blowing path until the bubble pops, or raise interest rates and let the bubble of deflation form. They are in a damned if you do, damned if you don't scenario. This is the end of the Fed and no time too soon. It's a 100-year-old failure and a very antiquated idea on how to run a currency. Ed, Aaron, who wants to go first?
Ed, I'm going to let you take that off the top. What do you think of that?
Ed, go.
Well, yeah, what I say probably will, it may surprise you, but I think that the whole concept of, having 12 guys in a room decide the price level for the entire economy just is a nuts kind of thing. It's basically central planning at the very heart of supposedly a free market economy. So it doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me. With regard to actually what's happening, I do believe that the Fed has they do believe that there are bubbles forming, and they're concerned about those bubbles, irrespective of what happens in the real economy in terms of jobs and inflation. So yes, they are looking to make sure that it doesn't get more bubblicious than it already is.
Bubblicious.
Ed, I have to say, I am surprised by those comments. I love when you take a hard stance like this because you're so good at being a diplomat. You were a diplomat, in fact. But, I have to say that while in theory 12 guys in a room deciding monetary policy that's going to affect the entire world as we know it is scary, the fact of the matter is the Federal Reserve, there were booms and busts prior to it. And we have to take into consideration that these are smart guys. Yes, we're putting a lot of faith in it, and there should be a lot of fact-checking and general follow-up and follow-through on what policy is being implemented. But I feel kind of secure in the current system that we have, and I know that's going to get a lot of comments on YouTube, but I have to say that I'm going to take the other side here.
Good. Well, I will say, though, that if it were up to me, I would give the Fed 0 mandates, not a dual mandate, 0 mandates. The only thing they should do is deal with, liquidity when bad things happen. Forget about their inflation targeting. Forget about their interest rate targeting. you know, all of that. Okay.
That's okay, like an emergency body.
Enough about the Fed. Let's move on. Okay, this is another one from YouTube. Low oil prices, like low metal prices, does not lead to less production in the short term because they have already put the time and money into the construction of the facilities. So they'll continue to pump unless the oil price goes below operating costs, as low as $10 or $20 per barrel. The only thing that can raise the oil price back from the dead is a surge in demand, which doesn't seem to be coming. So we're going to have to wait a while. Only an extended period of low oil prices can cause enough shutdowns and defaults to bring production back down. Or the Fed can prevent the market from fixing the problem by devaluing the dollar. That's what I'm betting on.
It's a lot of stuff,
yeah.
huh?
That's a lot of stuff. He covered, whoever that was, really covered a ton of ground in that one. I'm going to say that I think that this viewer is right on a lot of levels, absolutely spot on in most of the assessments. But I mean, in the short term, yes, it's going to, all of these, you know, rigs and drilling facilities that we see in the U.S., I shouldn't say all, but many of them are so levered that the problem is in the short term, yes, some of them aren't going to be able to hold on. And in the long term, a lot of them certainly aren't going to be able to hold on, especially when it gets to $10 or $20 if it gets there. So that's something to watch out. But they talk about Fed manipulation and keeping currency lower, so it won't be a problem long term. We'll see. We'll see. And no, we won't forget, because I want to follow up. And if that does happen, we will give kudos to this particular viewer.
Excellent. I have no comments. I want to hear what you have to say.
No comment.
Yeah.
I also don't have a comment on this particular statement, so I'd like to move on to the next one. What happens in 20 years in the future when all of Ukraine's national assets and farmland have been sold to private investors? Ukraine still has an unmanageable big debt, and Ukraine has nothing left to sell. My future scenario answer is the only option is for Ukraine to default, and I believe that is what Greece and Ukraine should do at the present time. Why are loan defaults so bad?
You know, I agree that loan defaults aren't so bad. What I would say is that we should be focusing on the fact that creditors have to do due diligence. The whole concept that, you know, you just have to loan the money and then after that it's all on the debtor to pay back the loan, to me is rubbish. In fact, you should have done your due diligence. If you gave money to someone who can't pay the loan back, shame on you. If they default, it's your fault. That's my story.
Ed, I actually like that. I agree with you as well, but I do think that it would be a huge deal if Greece and Ukraine default. I know that Ukraine is probably inevitable, but it would make a big difference and it would be very hard. But I like your position. And sadly, you guys, we're out of time, but thank you both so much. But also, you out there, we love hearing from you. Drop us a line on Facebook. And also, check out the Boom Bust YouTube page on Saturday for our complete, unfiltered interviews with Andrea Terzi and Pippa Malmgren. And as always, you can drop us a line on Twitter, @AaronAid, @EdwardNH, @Bianca Fascini. From all of us here at Boom Bust, thank you so much for watching. Have a wonderful weekend, and we'll see you next time.